So anyway, thank you guys for having me speak. And this is, I think this is probably only like the second time that I've officially spoke for at the club, besides, every meeting when I'm leading it. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Jim Garcia. I'm the owner of Pirate Creek Bees. And so I think I changed the name of your presentation a little bit, Jerry. So I would say preparing for spring, and which is kind of the same thing. Hang on, let me get my, there we go. A little background: owner of Pirate Creek Bees. We're a commercial apiary. We do pollination, honey, nuke sales, queen production. Also, currently for the next couple months here, the president of the Alameda County Beekeepers Association. I was also a past president of the Delta Bee Club, which was a commercial beekeeping club out of Modesto. Also the past board of directors rep for the California State Beekeepers as well, which is an organization statewide that is primarily commercial beekeepers. They also have clubs that are represented as well. And the two things that they really do well is they have a lobby. They pay a lobbyist to stay in Sacramento and push for beekeeping regulations at the state level. They also spend about $100,000 a year in research, in doing funding research projects. Dr. Nino and other researchers have used their funding source to make their projects happen. And so that's again, the Pirate Creek Bees. What we do from as beekeepers or as a company is we're primarily, and most of revenue comes from retail honey sales, and we're actually kind of shifting away from retail. We also do wholesale buckets and barrels. A bucket is 5-gallon bucket, and a barrel is 55 gallons of honey. Also do pollination, and we're not a huge pollination company. We do almonds because everyone does almonds because that's where the money is. This year we did cherries, and we've been doing blackberries for quite a few years. And I put the time frames. Almonds is I'm going to talk about almonds a little bit more today, just because it's the first one. It's what really starts off the bee season for us. And so almonds is kind of an important crop for us and for most of the beekeepers. Cherries was kind of fun. What I really liked was the cherry honey. So, we didn't, you don't make as much off of cherries, but you get the honey, and the honey came out really, really good. And blackberries the same way, not a lot of money in blackberries, but the blackberry honey is outstanding. We also sell nukes, and we do 5-frame deeps. And time frame is normally April through June-ish. And then queens, and most of our queens we use internally, but we also do retail sales of queens as well. This year, I had some health issues and didn't end up doing queens for very long this year, but normally it's from April to about August. And then beekeeping classes, we do a few of those. We have a nice room that has a big TV, and we can fit quite a few people in it. So we do a couple hours of classroom sessions and a couple hours of hands-on. I normally go down to, we have an apiary that's within a short, very, very short over the dirt road type of drive. And so we normally, we've do beginning classes, and actually we did kind of a mixture beginner intermediate class this year as well. And but the format's kind of 2 hours and 2 hours. So that's Pirate Creek, and this meeting is preparing for spring, and so I wanted to start off. Why do you even worry about preparing for spring? And I'm going to give you, again, I'm a beekeeper, so I'm going to give you my opinion. And so most of what I'm going to talk about here is opinion. And my opinion is that even in the Bay Area, whether you're commercial or a hobby, the season starts pretty close to the same time. For commercial, almonds happens at about normally the first or second week of February, which is really the first crop. The bees are coming out of winter, and in fact, pretty much in February, they're still in winter. And they're, and then we move them into almonds, and almonds is just an amazing crop for them, where they're getting bombarded by this super rich protein, and normally the bees just like explode, in size. And from a hobbyist standpoint, even if you're not going to almonds, you're starting to get wildflowers, and things like mustard up in the hills will start blooming even as early as January. So January, February, you're starting to see flowers even around here starting to produce. And if you're trying to get honey, large hives make honey. Small hives don't. Not enough to take. So, one of the ideas would be making sure that your bees are at a size that you can actually take the honey, and they can make enough honey to produce for themselves and you. Large hives make honey. From a commercial standpoint, the contracts require large hives. We have to have, eight frame averages. 8 frame meaning a frame being 80% of the frame, if you pulled it out, would be covered with bees, and eight of those in a hive. And the challenge is that the bees really don't want to build up that early. And so we actually, I'm going to go through a lot of this. We actually manipulate the bees to do that. So they're in February, they're at a good size. So I'm going to start with what are commercial pollination services. And a lot of people may not may not know how that works, or if you haven't been on in a field or orchard, some of the pictures here may be of interest to you. So just many of the fruits and vegetables need bees to produce a product, produce, whether it's almonds, cherries, melons, berries, citrus. And the first part of the process is getting a contract between a producer and the beekeeper. And normally pollination contracts are, again, like I said a minute ago, 8 frame average. So if you take all the frames and average them out, you would have 8 frames, but 5 frame minimum. So you can't really take a small hive in there. So 8 frame average, 5 frame minimum. And the other part of the contract normally is, they won't spray while the bees are in there. They won't spray during the day. They can spray at night, and when the bees are not flying. For the most part, though, almonds, the almond board has discouraged and actually done studies showing that even spraying fungicides actually reduces their pollination, the bees' pollination effectiveness, and it's not beneficial to the almond growers to actually even spray, even fungicides. Not let alone anything that's harmful to the bee. Fungicides itself aren't. There's some adjuvants they put in the fungicides that have been known to cause some issues. But the bottom line is, if they spray that, then the bees aren't going to touch their trees for a day or so, and that's and they require those bees to produce a crop, especially in almonds. The next step in the process is we throw the bees on a truck and drive them out to the orchards or fields. And how that works is normally it's a very short notice. We get a day or so, or sometimes 2 or 3 days, saying that, okay, we need them now, and so we need to be ready. And we actually start preparing in January for a February transport. So we start, getting the pallets with the right number of bees, and load balancing the bees, where if you have one that has 20 frames of bees, you can move them around and manipulate them to even them out. And so that process starts in January, and then we transport the hives at night. And I've got some pictures of that coming up here in a second. And then once you're there, the bees can be graded. They can have an outside service, or themselves go out and they'll pop the lids and grade the bees.
Jim, you say you manipulate them. Does that mean like you'll add frames from a bigger hive to a smaller hive to?
Yes, normally frames of brood. So we move brood around a lot. So we'll take a frame of brood with bees on it normally, and we'll move it over, make sure the queen's not being moved, and put them in there. And a frame of bees is going to produce 2 to 3 frames of. I'm sorry, a frame of brood is going to produce 2 or 3 frames of bees. And it's a way to boost up, especially if we start doing this in January, way to boost up the populations to get everything up to that eight frame average, or things that make sure that we have the 5 frame minimum.
Are you also doing
Answer,
splits
Sue?
in January?
Yes.
Are you also doing splits in January? If you have strong hives, would you split them and big queen?
You can. The hard part doing that time of year is getting queens, because the queen producers aren't producing queens. And I haven't, but some people will go out there and actually generate a queen in the field. And so, which works fine if you put enough bees in there, and as long as you have enough bees to make sure that you're covering the contract. The downside there is, you run it like an 80% chance of it succeeding, or 20% chance of it not. But it still works for the contract.
Okay, I have a question. So then, what do they pay and how do they pay? They go by the set rates, or go by the amount of bees?
Yeah, great question.
Scale.
So traditionally, the way that it looks to me as if this is going to change in the future. But look, traditionally what happens is it's a price per hive. So, kind of do the numbers here. You've got, you need 2 hives per acre for almonds. And there's basically 1.5 million acres of almonds. You need about 3 million hives. So the reason why almonds is so lucrative for beekeepers is, we can get somewhere between $175 and $200 per hive. And that's hard to turn down. I mean, it's, compare that to something like cherries, where you're looking at somewhere like at the $40 to $50 per hive range. So to answer your question, it's per hive, and you're required to keep them at that level for the duration of the of the bloom. So you go in right before the bloom starts. Sometimes they put you in earlier, which is a big problem, but you go in there with the bloom, and then you are released after the bloom has finished, and hopefully they don't keep it too long. This is a monocrop, so once the bloom is done, there's nothing out there. There's nothing out there for 3 million hives. So does that answer your question, son?
Hey,
Yes,
hey,
it does.
Jim, how long are these actually out in the field?
Yeah, normally it's traditionally it's almost a month. It depends on weather. There's some years we've had super blooms where it's shrunk down to 2 to 3 weeks. But normally it's, there's a couple of years in a row that was like going in on Valentine's Day and coming out on the 15th. So, it's been almost the 15th of March, almost exactly a month. And there's always some challenges of getting out as well. This is during the rainy season. So some of the places get kind of muddy, and sometimes you can't pull them out. I was in Oakdale about, 3 or 4 years ago, and, we weren't able to get out because the rain kept on raining. Last couple of years, we haven't had that problem.
So then you say there's a monocrop, then let's say about, I would say at the minimum 4 weeks. Is there some certain requirement how many weeks that should be in, like 4 to 6 weeks?
No.
And second question is that the meantime it's a monocrop, then of course I don't think the bloom will be lasted that long, but do you need to feed them in meantime or afterwards or before?
Well, let's talk about almonds to start with. So normally, if you have a good grower, you'll go in right as the bloom starts, right as they'll start picking up off the trees. And it's not time-based. So you don't contract for a month, you contract for the bloom period. So from when the bloom starts to when the bloom finishes. So that's the contract. And that normally ends up being right around a month. So did I answer that? Was there a second part that I missed?
One other thing I think was second question was that then meantime, do you need to feed them?
Or do I need to feed? No. So the almond honey, they're producing almond honey while they're in there. And, almonds produce honey and almonds produce pollen. So they've got just a huge resource of super high potent, the pollen is very potent. And, bees normally do very, very well. They build up quickly in almonds. And if it goes later than you want, nectar from the honey they produce from almonds is absolutely horrible to eat. So having them eat out the honey in almonds is a good thing, because we pretty much have to extract it so it doesn't get mixed in with anything we're going to sell. So normally you don't have to feed. I've had sometimes where we fed going in because we were going in earlier than we should have. So I fed prior to the bloom at times, but once the bloom starts, there is normally just an abundance of food, unless you get a weather problem where the bees can't fly for a week. Remember, these hives are big and they're eating a lot of resource. So if they can't fly for a while, it doesn't take them long to eat through their resource. So at that point, you would also have to feed. I've had that happen. I haven't had it happen for a few years, but I've had that happen before. We've actually, mid-time in there, we've actually, had to go feed. But normally it's not. Normally you go in, drop them off. Most people drop them off and forget about it until they get called to pick them up. I like to check on them once a week. Normally you don't have to feed. Yeah, any other
I think Sung's other question was about getting paid, and normally you get what, half the amount in a check when you drop them off, and
that's normal. Normal is that if I've had some times where working through a broker where you don't get it till the end. I don't like that. I like getting them half and half on delivery and half on pickup. And pretty much in the future we'll only accept that. But normally it's half and half, and it's per hive. You paid per hive.
Then I see there's some variation in the pricing. Then who determines each hive for how much?
It's normally the going rate. So the last few years it's been between 175 to the 200. Sometimes people will hold off. I know beekeepers will hold off until it's almost the last minute. And I know some people that get up to 230 to 250 because the orchard's desperate. So it's whatever the market is, whatever you can get. And it's negotiated individually.
Excuse me for my ignorance, but I have a simple question. When you're talking about frames, that's the number, those are inside a box, right?
Correct.
So that could be one box with 8 frames in it.
It could be, yes. You normally wouldn't leave it at one box. You normally could have a single box that has 8 frames or 8 or 10, 8 to 10 frames of bees. You would put a second one on there so they have room to store, so you don't end up with bees trying to swarm on you during almonds. Remember that they're picking up a lot of stimulation, a lot of resource.
Yeah. Now, when you bring them out there, you have to bring a deep with it, though, right? You can't leave the queen behind.
No, the queen stays. It's the whole full colony. The full colony goes in. I'm going to actually in a second show you some pictures. So
you're bringing a deep, and then as well as that, another box with 8 frames in it. Is that right?
So what we normally do is I run all deeps. So we'll have a brood chamber that's a deep. That'll have basically the brood in it. Sometimes I'll run my brood chambers, or sometimes we split between two deeps. But normally it's at least one deep. And some people, there's some beekeepers, there's variations of this. Some people actually use a deep and a medium, and I think they call it a California configuration. And so there's a lot of people that do that, but I run all single type of equipment. So I run all deeps.
Thank you.
I mean, could you say, like, if we clarify, not just a frame number of frame wise, like the bees, like 8 frame worth of bees? like 8 frames, the bees will cover about 8 frames?
Mhm. Yes. And to consider it in a frame of bees, it's 80% coverage on the frame.
Okay, great.
So, Jim, I don't quite understand. So you take a deep that's got 8 frames of bees in it. If you put another deep on it so they can stick honey in there, now you've got 4 frames of bees in
But
it.
you still only have 8 frames of bees. I mean, still, you're counting the frames of bees or estimating the frames of bees throughout the entire hive. If you have 20 frames in there, you still are trying to average, you're trying to calculate how many actual frames of bees there are.
Oh,
It's not precise. It's not a precise
it's
measurement
8 frames per hive, not per box.
per hive,
I
per
got
colony.
it. Right, I got it. That makes more, yeah, that makes sense.
So this is a really old picture because I can tell because we used to strap them side to side, but this is just a truckload. And, normally going out, some places take 60 hives in an orchard. If the orchard's 30 acres and it's a 60 hive orchard, you could have multiple trips going out there. This is a long time ago. In fact, this is a really long time ago. So I'm actually strapping down side to side. This is a little more recent, and so I wanted this picture in there because people normally don't see other people walking on top of hives. That's Austin there on the top, and that's Ron right there.
Yeah.
That's back when your suit was a little wider there, Ron.
Yeah.
This is, you can tell the sun is starting to go down. We've actually loaded. We'll start loading normally while the sun is still, if it's, my preference would be to start loading when the sun is still up a little bit, so that when the sun actually sets, I'm putting the last hives on. And this one, we were also going to be loading the back of that trailer too. This is just tying down the front.
And the temperature outside is usually what, like when you're loading?
It's February, so it could be darn cold.
So the bees are most likely in the hive anyway and not out
Yes.
foraging.
Yeah, they're normally in the hive. They're normally in the hive earlier. If you zoom in here, you'll see them walking. These hives aren't closed up; they're open, and you'll see them walking around the outside here. So we normally will go through and with the smoker, we'll smoke them back in just so they're not flying around while we're trying to strap things down. Notice on this one, we're strapping down front to back, and that's the way we do it now because it takes 4 straps, much easier to deal with. And we're pulling against, as we pull, and they're pulling against each other instead of, if we go the other way, you see the gaps between we used to have problems with it, everything trying to get squished together and you have openings all over the place. So this is a much better way to strap down for us.
Jim, if you're loading a trailer, you send another truck with the trailer for the forklift?
Yeah. So normally we'd go with 2 trucks going out. And sometimes it'll be that truck that you saw there and the trailer, I would pull the skid steer, which is the forklift. And then, Ron, actually last time you had a gooseneck, 25-foot gooseneck that we'd also load bees up on. And we double deck them. So if you saw, let me back up a step here. You saw there's actually two tiers of bees. So there's a pallet there. Can you guys see the cursor?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, so then it went away. So that's one pallet and hives up here, and there's another set of pallets down below, and they're stacked side by side, and we load them from the side. There'll be a picture of us loading them here in a second. And Austin's walking around the top of them, making sure that the strap is in the right spot. And this is, well, actually, I thought this is a bee on. I thought I put that in there because I thought it was cool. Could you guys actually see the movement? My internet fast enough?
We did.
Okay. Any idea what type of tree that is? Who's our? I thought it was almonds, but it's not an almond tree.
Cherry?
No, it's actually apricot. It's actually right. Anyone's been to our place? It's one of those trees that are right by the barn. And then This is just a picture of bees. This is out in almonds. You can tell by the almond petals are out. And, you know, again, these hives have to be huge. So these weren't even fitting inside. And also realize, you know, this is normally pretty cold. You know, this is February and beginning of March. So it's normally pretty cold outside. This is bees pollinating blackberries. This is down in Watsonville. And this is just a, and you can see in the back here, this is actually the blackberries. And they put these tints over the top of them. And this is moving out of almonds. So that's the skid steer we normally would use. We have a couple different skid steers. That one is the nice one because it has enclosed cabs, so you really don't even need a suit on inside. And when things go well, I get to drive the skid steer inside. I think my brother's driving it on this one. And again, Austin standing on top of hives in his bee suit. And now you know kind of why we wear a full bee suit too, so you don't end up with bees running up your pant leg. And this is
one question, Jim. Do you like the track vehicles better than the Humvees?
No, I actually like the wheeled ones better. The tracks have that chatter to them as those tracks hit the ground, and it causes a vibration that kind of ticks them off after a while. So I actually like the wheeled ones better.
Do the wheel ones turn smoother?
Yeah, they ride smoother. Yeah.
Do those all have side shift?
No, they don't. And so with the skid steers, you know, we can get by without side shift by just, you know, pulling the forks back and pushing it sideways, you know, with the skid steer itself. And this is Jimmy was taking a picture of Austin taking a picture with Bill with his hand up. So this is a picture of a picture. There are some dangers. This was a couple of years ago. I think this was out in Gustine. And this is some type of, my guess is a pesticide kill. It was something that didn't kill them immediately and they died back at the hive. Most pesticide kills, they don't even come back because they're dead already. So this is one of the dangers. And, you know, there's quite a few. I mean, there's been a big problem with people stealing hives. You know, so they roll up with their own forklift to take the hives away, and they, you know, then they've got, you know, every hive is worth, you know, several $100s. So it's a big theft. Pesticide, which this is, and then insect growth regulators, IGRs is probably the worst one because you really don't see it until after you get back from almonds because it's actually attacking the brood. It's retarding the reproductive system of the bees. And then, whoops, this is sideways. And this is Ron, and this is the other danger.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if I could, I don't know why that's in sideways, but anyway, he got stung through his veil and definitely had a serious swelling issue. So the other danger of dealing with bees, especially bees at night, they find holes to get into and can cause all problems. This is a couple of years ago. The one you were talking about, Ron, was this year, right? With the bee up your nose.
Yeah, seemed like each year something happens.
Yeah, this year he had, you know, got in his suit and the thing crawled up his nose. And yeah, I can honestly say that hasn't happened to me yet. And I hope it never does.
I have a question about the kill, the pesticides. Isn't that on the orchard owner? Do you have any recourse when your bees end up dead at the orchard?
Not normally, because you really can't control where the bees are getting it from. And most of the orchards are really good at not spraying. So what normally happens is the bees will find another source, and the source could be the neighbor, which you have no control over and no way to even know where it's coming from. Our biggest, the biggest danger time is before the bloom and after the bloom. And with all the petals on the ground, this is probably after the bloom. And the reason is bloom is gone. They're looking for food somewhere else. I haven't been released yet, so I can't pull the hives. And they're out there getting into things they shouldn't be getting into. And this is a result.
Thank you.
Some myths, people think that since it's a monocrop, the bees will come out weaker. Not true. Bees normally come out of almonds incredibly strong. I think if you went from monocrop to monocrop to monocrop, that could be a problem. We don't do that. But, almonds themselves, again, the bees go in, they go in, at 8 frames, and they'll come back, pretty big. I mean, one large brood cycle through. The hives normally grow fast. And again, the hives normally grow fast in almonds. And we also have not had any major issue with diseases. We have had, this year we had a spray problem, I believe. We had, bees went in strong and went down to nothing. So that was our only major problem I've ever had really in almonds. The picture from before was an isolated hive. It wasn't all the hives. So not, so normally it's not, and the almond board's best practices say don't spray. And so they're really pushing their growers not to do any spraying, not only for the bees' sake, but also for the fact that they need, they need the bees on the flowers to pollinate. If the bees don't want to touch the flowers, they're not getting pollinated. So that was any questions on pollination? Should I leave it on that page there? Any questions on pollination? Any more questions, I should say? So from a commercial standpoint, that's one of the major especially almonds. A lot of beekeepers do only almonds. They go in, do almonds, and then split and kind of just get ready for the next almond bloom the next year. And a lot of commercial operations, that's all they're doing. And it's just because almonds today pay well. I am not, almonds is kind of a necessary evil for me. It's money you can't pass up. And if there was a way not to do it, that would be my preference. But let me actually back up and describe the last one. So anyway, so what kind of the topic for today was really, preparing for spring. And so when do you start that? And, we really start preparing for almonds really in August. And, then, it's a cycle, the bee season, if you will, making nukes and making splits and producing honey for around here is normally done in June, July. August is really starting to focus on the next year. And what we really do is we focus on 2 things. August and September, October is really the time to sit there and focus on varroa control. And so testing, treating, making sure the bees are clean, making sure the bees are healthy. And then starting in November, and normally is, we'll start here probably in a few weeks, is really heavy brood stimulation. So to stimulate brood, you need you need pollen, and you need carbohydrates for honey and nectar. So we'll start with varroa control, test and treat. My threshold for treating is probably lower than 99% of the people here. It's a 2% threshold. When things are going well, I like to, testing monthly is what I would prefer. And this time of year, we can use all kinds of different products because honey is pretty much done. We're in the middle of a dearth. And so we could use, if we needed to, amatraz-based stuff like Apivar even, but anything to keep the mite load down. The goal is to have strong disease-free bees going into winter. So here are just some treatment options, and I've had talks about this in other previous meetings, but formic acid, Mite-Away quick strips, organic acid. You can use it with honey supers, penetrates the brood cell. It's a great product. Downside, a little rough on queens. So this time of year, I know, the gentleman I was talking about, Terry Holcomb, that was my mentor. He just told me he just went through and did a Mite-Away treatment on his. So, even this time of year, he's using it. But it is definitely it definitely is can be harmful to queens. It also is temperature sensitive, and this time of year for us is not a problem. The other one that's a newer product that's also a formic acid, which is Formic Pro. It is a 2-week period, a 2-week, and it, you know, it has the same, you know, 50 to 82 degree temperature range that it can work in, 14-day versus 7 days with MitoWave with the quick strips. So formic acid is something you can use this time of year as well. Again, you still run the risk of queen loss. Other treatments not approved in California still, and I don't know if it ever will be because of it's more political than anything, is oxalic acid. People use it, but vaporizing, and you know, it's approved federally, but not in just not California. Drizzle or dribble vaporization, and now with Randy's new shop towels or shims or sponges, depending upon what flavor that you like. Good option as well. Only thing to keep in mind is the treatment, you know, the drizzle and the vaporization, they do not penetrate the cells. So some people will do it multiple treatments to get you know, a full brood cycle through. Brood stimulation. Brood stimulation is protein and carbs. So protein plus carbs equals bees, and so bees require both protein and carbohydrates to produce bees. So honey and pollen, basically. Carbohydrates, we use a 1-to-1, and I don't know if you can see that, but I put ish because I know a lot of you measure out very precisely. I don't. I do about half and about half, and my method of measuring is, I think Ron can attest to this, is pretty crude. But 1-to-1-ish, and the goal here is to stimulate, to make them feel like they're in a nectar flow. Things to watch for, you know, if you overfeed them, you could be wasting sugar. You could cause them to get honey bound where they don't have places to lay brood. And easy test, you go to the edge of the hive, give it a lift and see if it's heavy or not. You can tell pretty much, you know, whether you need to feed or not just by the weight of the hive. And this is how we mix the sugar. It's a 55-gallon drum, and this is a video. So that's that copper tube is actually has it's just an air tube, and it's connected to we have a large compressor, and it just blows air and makes kind of a sugar water jacuzzi and mixes up the sugar that way. If you're doing it at home, obviously you're probably not doing 55-gallon drums at a time. You're probably doing much smaller buckets, and you can shake it, but it's too hard to shake a 500-pound, you know, jug of water. So this is our method, is that the air hose, and works really well. Works better if you have hot water, but even with cold water, eventually it it works. The other, I couldn't find any pictures of us making patties, but we make our own patty supplement, and so this is just a picture of patties in the freezer. So pollen patties for protein, you know, if we're doing a protein supplement, we'll throw pollen patties on top of the hives. Now we're actually using just a scooper and just throwing it, you know, raw on top of the hives and not making it into patties. The patty making process was pretty laborious. One thing to watch for on the pollen patties is small hive beetle larvae, because they love to lay their eggs in that protein. The other thing I did this year as well, and I've done it in years past, is feeding pollen supplement dry. It comes in a powder, and I actually use a bucket and have a hole in the top of the bucket, and I just flip it upside down with some rails so the bees can get underneath, and they'll eat it out of the bucket. So that's what I do like about that, is it's a good summertime option. You know, it doesn't work well if you start getting rain and moisture. And the bees actually store the pollen supplement actually in the cells, just like they do natural pollen. Which patties they don't do.
Jim, in another presentation or question and answer, you mentioned that you mixed your own.
Yes.
And you gave your recipe, and I failed to write it down. Can you share?
I'm gonna let the expert of the recipe give it, because Ron has done probably more of mixing for me than I have mixed. So Ron, do you want
to? Like Jim said, we're making large quantities of that. So we have a 5-gallon bucket, and the other thing that in this particular batch, we were using the almond honey as the liquid base. So you'd put because you can't sell it or use it, it's so bitter, you just give it back to the bees. So you get a like a 6-quart pot, put your honey in there and heat it to about 160 degrees, and then pour that into a 5-gallon bucket. And then it's the equivalent of, the red cups, the red plastic cups.
red solo cups?
Yeah, 14 of those. And that was just trial and error. You want to get it to a consistency of
like peanut butter.
Yeah, thick peanut butter, not cake batter. That's too thin. So more like peanut butter. And we had a hand drill with a mixer blade on the bottom of it.
So a mortar mixer.
Yeah, a mortar mixer, right. And so we'd mix it all together. And we'd also add 1 cup of oil. And with that combination, it would come out, and we had this press we used. You'd lay it 1 sheet of wax paper, put enough of your product to cover the area of the wax paper, put another sheet on top, and then we had a press, and it was just, once you got the product made, it went fairly well, but the problem was once we finished, I didn't have another bucket ready to go, and then I had to stop the process, make another bucket. So if we'd had some more people helping, then we could have had a faster product. But basically, it's trial and error to get the dry pollen. With this year, we didn't have much almond honey, so we just used sugar water.
And basically the same process, and we basically put the powder in until it became that consistency.
Correct. And then
use 1-to-1 sugar water, a cup of oil, and then mix until peanut butter.
Right.
And the oil you used was
cheap oil. Yes, as cheap as I could find. Vegetable oil.
Veg, huh?
Yeah.
Jim and Ron, was that 1 measuring cup or 1 solo cup of oil?
1 cup, just 1 measuring cup of oil.
And how many cups of honey, you think?
Oh, it was like a 6-quart container that we had. But again, we were making a 5-gallon bucket of it.
Yeah.
So you just have to proportion it out.
Scale it down.
Really, what you're trying to do, because the dry pollen is like dust, so you have to continue to add your either sugar water or honey that you're not going to use. Get it heat it so it's melted, and you just keep adding the liquid until you get it to peanut butter paste, and then you're there.
It is super hard on equipment. So, we originally were using drills, and the drills would burn up, and the mortar mixture does better, but even the mortar mixture starts to smoke after a while. So definitely it's a tough one. It's tough to mix. I would not use your fancy, any type of kitchen appliance, because you're going to burn it out.
When you use sugar water, is it 1-to-1?
Yes. And again, it's my 1-to-1, which is 1-to-1-ish.
So Ron said if you could some extra help. I got nothing but time, so would you let me know? I'd be more than help.
Oh.
Yeah. Be careful. Cool. Be careful what you ask for.
I know what I'm getting into.
I've been able to suck people in.
Hey,
But yeah, the good part about this effort, that picture Jim had of all the pollen patties stacked in the freezer, when you need to feed, you just pull it out, throw them on there. I mean, it literally took 3 seconds to feed the hive. And when you've got hundreds of hives to feed, it's a no-brainer to do it that way. So it's well worth the effort. And even if you don't, I make, you know, at my house, I make some, not in the quantity Jim does. And sometimes if we have extras, I'll bring them home. But even feeding my hives here, it's a no-brainer. Just throw it on there and you're done.
I get that. So yeah, just have you guys started making patties yet, or
Very soon.
very soon? Okay, would you let me know?
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, put my name on it.
so I have a suggestion for both of you on equipment. It would be great if you could figure out the sugar water, honey, oil combination and have it warm and then add the dry to the liquid. It'll be much easier on your motors.
That is what we do. It's just that last bit that causes the havoc.
And we found, again, trial and error. We did exactly what you said, Sue. And I added too much powder and it started to get like cement. And that's when we were burning up the motor. So I've got it down now. That's why I said 14 cups is exactly right. And you don't add them all at one time, just a little bit more. And around the 13th, 14th cup, you're done.
Excuse me, Ron, what are you adding? What type of powder? Dry pollen?
Yeah, it's dry pollen supplement, Mega Bee or Ultra Bee or one of the dry pollen supplements. We don't make our own supplement. We purchase a supplement.
50-pound bags and open it up. And you have to be careful. Keep the bags in a good plastic container because the mice like it.
Yeah, the protein that the rodents love, and they'll even, you know, I've had them eat through the container, even a plastic container. So you got to be careful with where you store it.
When you add a patty to the hive, do you put it directly on top of the brood frames?
Right over the brood. Yep.
And the other thing, a good indicator when you go back later on to check the hive and you see all these little bits of white paper on the ground, you know it's been a success because they've cleaned out the hive, get rid of all of the wax paper.
So especially during this winter time when the temperature is colder, are you adding the pollen on the top of the second box, right under the cover, or you are adding it in between the boxes?
In between the boxes.
And to cut down on the small hive beetle, we've experimented with cutting the patties in half. So you can see that the patties are about 4 or 5 inches wide and, you know, maybe 10 to 12 inches long. Cut that in half and put 2 pieces in there. So it's the more surface area for the bees to get to, consequently less surface area for the small hive bees.
And also, you know, especially if you start feeding early, if you feed them earlier, I like to experiment, put a small piece in there to start with and see if they eat it. If they're not eating it, then there's no need to put more in. You know, last year they started eating in, I think we started in July and we fed them all the way through. But, you know, this year I had some health issues, so I didn't do that. So we're going to do more traditional, which will be feeding starting beginning of November through all the way through to almond time.
And you do the pollen and the sugar water at the same time?
Yes, you can.
Thank you.
I try to actually get the sugar water done before it gets cold because I don't like putting more moisture in. So I would like to have the hives at a good weight prior to November or, you know, December, because I don't want them to have to dehydrate the sugar water or the nectar, or the sugar water. So I prefer that. Now, if I have to do emergency feeding during the winter, I normally will use divert sugar on the top. Any questions on pollen?
Have you considered using a cement mixer for part of the mixing?
Well, we're using a mortar mixer now, which is close to a cement mixer, but I actually had thought about using one of the big rotating drum style, and I'd like to try that. My fear is, the stuff is super sticky. My fear is it's going to stick to the blades inside of it and just be one big clump going around in circles.
Once we got the right consistency of dry to wet, then we weren't smoking the motors as much. So it's.
And that mortar mixer made a big difference because it's much heftier than the drill.
But you have to be careful that one cup can put you over the line, and that's why it was that 13 or 14 cups. You got to start looking with the amount of honey and oil we put in there. That was perfect. And since we heated the honey to about 160 degrees, the product was, hot to work with as well.
And also, but liquidy, very, not thick, very,
Yeah, it's
very liquidy to.
It's like.
And then it would, it also solidify a little bit when it cooled as well, so it got the better texture. Moving on to the next one is the
Jim, one more question, if you please.
Yep.
From when we're talking about doing this supplement, we're not looking in our area for building up resources in the hive. We're looking at stimulating brood. So is the timing of the syrup and the pollen sub important one way or the other, one first and one second, or both together?
It's all about brood cycle. So I like to have heavy hives, so good stores on them prior to actual winter time, because I don't want to do liquid feeding if I can help it during the winter. I'm sorry, yeah, liquid feeding during the winter. I try to not do that. I would rather have have honey stored in the hives already. And then the pollen supplement is what I'm normally feeding mostly in the winter itself.
So then a pollen sub application without supplemental syrup feeding would be effective without the syrup.
Yes, because you still have the carbs from the honey that's stored in the hive.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I try my best not to. What I don't want to do is just create a moisture problem in the hive by putting a whole bunch of moisture in, dropping a gallon of moisture in a hive that they have to evaporate out when it's cold outside, which it's much harder to evaporate in the wintertime. So any other questions before I move on? All right, so the next is, I just want to touch on, I do winter inspection. I do a little bit differently than I would do a full inspection in better weather. So I hardly ever pull frames unless I see there's an issue that I have to pull frames. I hardly ever do that in the wintertime. Normally can look at the top, crack, we call it cracking the lid, crack the lid, look at the top, crack between the boxes, flip them up on edge and look underneath. And I got some pictures here in a second. And I'm looking for how many bees there are. Do I smell anything odd? Are they agitated, excited? I'm looking at all aspects of their behavior, and I'm not really not trying to find the queen. And then when I look at from the bottom, I can see, by separating the frames a little bit, I can see up there and see if there is brood. Do I have a laying worker, a bunch of drone brood up in there? I can tell a lot just from looking from the top and from the bottom, and not really breaking that cluster up and that exposing those bees to the outside air. And then the other thing I'll do is check the weight. So basically go to the edge and pick it up. If it's super light, then I need to put some carbs in there, some honey. If it's in the middle of the winter and it's cold, then I'll use divert sugar as emergency feeding. And I normally take I use blue shop towels for everything. Take a blue shop towel, just pour divert sugar on the top and let them eat it. There's normally enough moisture in the coming off the lid to, you know, to moisten the sugar. So that would be my emergency feeding if necessary for carbs. Any questions on that?
Where do you buy your divert sugar?
I get it from, you can get it from Man Lake. Man Lake actually sells it. And I didn't know this until I went in there. But they sell 50-pound sacks of it. So, you know, the club might want to, you know, a 50-pound sack is probably more than most people in the club would ever use. You know, we could, you know, get together with a few people and buy a sack and break it, you know, divide it. But Man Lake does sell it now, which it was hard to find. You know, it's a bake supply type of thing.
I've gotten it at Biofuel Oasis.
Yeah. Yeah, and there are some suppliers around. I don't know off the top of my head the names.
I have done a lot of research because in my former beekeeping experience, Oakland, there was a Baker Supply down there that carried it. But even like US Foods does not carry a divert sugar. They carry some sugar that is supposed to be for fondant called baker's sugar, but I cannot find out the chemical. And the difference is that the divert sugar is easily assimilated by the bees, where granulated sugar is not, because it's the balance of the sucrose and the glucose in the divert that makes it a bee happy feed.
Yeah, so Man Lake has it or had it, and so, you know, again, you know, a group of us may want to get together and pick some up there, you know.
Occasionally I've seen it at the Hayward Business Costco.
Oh, okay, well, that's good to know.
You guys might want to just establish a relationship with some kind of baker who orders stuff on a regular basis, like a weekly, so they get a weekly delivery. If you just become friends with the owner, they'll a lot of times let you just add on. And we did that with a baker up in Novato, and you know, it would be $37.50 for a 50-pound bag, and it worked out really well. We just, you know, put an order with a guy and it'd be there the next week, and it worked out really well.
Yeah.
But Man Lake is kind of scalping you a little bit.
Yeah,
they are stocking it, and it's, you know, I don't know if it's part of their shipping, but you know, their shipping is, at least it was before they, you know, before the ownership change, it was pretty good. I haven't ordered something from Man Lake for a while.
It's not in the catalog, however.
It's not in the catalog. I saw it actually in Woodland when I
yes, it's on the floor.
Yeah.
Again, Jim, how do you feed the divert sugar?
I've done it several different ways. The way that I now like to do it, and I think Ron does it the same way, is I take a shop towel, put it on top of the frames right above the brood chamber again, and pour a pile of it on there and let just the hive moisture moisten it. And, you know, and they take it. They seem to eat it up well that way. I used to take a little spray bottle and just slightly moisten the top of it. But what I found is where I moisten ends up a brick and they don't touch it. So, you know, by letting just the natural hive moisture take care of it, it seems to work better for me. And that's just, again, my observation. I know there's probably people who do it differently.
I've also just put it on the inside cover, and that's worked well.
Yeah. If you have an inner cover, that probably is better. I'm a migratory cover, so I don't have that option.
Right. Because the thing is, if it does become all hard, you could just take your hive tool and flip that off and not have it be an issue.
But yeah, so you could also use shims if you're trying to do it inside of the hive where the bees are a little warmer. Because you know, you're doing this at least for me, I'm doing it in an emergency situation, which means it's too cold for me to feed liquid, or I don't prefer not feeding liquid. And the reason is I don't feed, you know, some people use frame feeders, and that you probably don't have that problem with a frame feeder. But yeah, mine's outside, so that's, you know, it comes into the hive cold. This is just an example, the picture here is, tipping the inner and looking from the underneath, looking down through the top, you can see the, you can see the bees in the top, and I would actually tip this box as well to finish the inspection. And here you can see, well, in this case, you can see actually, queen cups being made. So that's, always something to keep an eye on. But you can tell a lot just from looking from underneath on those inspections. And any questions on that type of, and again, some of the things I do because it needs to be fast. A lot of hives to get through, don't have time to, to do things slow. So this inspection, especially in the wintertime, is super fast and does not disturb the bees a whole lot.
Hey, Jim, you may want to mention back to like the almond grading, that the picture, the lower left there, how many frames of bees, when you talk about minimum 5, minimum 8.
So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, probably 6.5. That probably is not covered well there. So this is probably a 6 to 7 frame there. There's probably a frame or so on top. So the combined would probably be about an 8 frame. And that's exactly how it's done. It's not done scientifically. It's someone looking through there going, it's about a frame, and counting them up. The other type of inspection that I do is a thermal, and I don't do this as often as I should because it's really a great technique. Using a thermal camera, and do this at night. And these images are actually from, you can actually see the, you see the image that the lighter is, the lighter the image, the hotter it is, and you're seeing the heat actually penetrating the wood itself. Going back to one of the conversations at one of the meetings we had a couple, I think it was last month, right? About heat being lost through the wood. So what I like about this is that you can get an idea of hive strength without opening the hive whatsoever. Take a picture of it, and you can see that, to produce this pattern, you probably have 7 frames of bees in there. And you see that there's a lot of bees in this picture, even clustered in the front here. These hot spots are bees sitting on the front porch. And I've got some more pictures of that as well. So, you take a look at this the brood chamber is slightly off to the side. You can also see that the handle sticks out really, really bright too. The indention in the wood. Again, you can see that, these hives actually have a good number of bees in them. This one's from looking down from the top, and you can see the size of the cluster, the ring of the cluster here, saying, again, this is at night. So these are all packed together, generating heat, trying to stay warm. And you can see where that cluster is in the hive through the wood itself. Here's another example. I put a different filter on this one, so it's a different color in the back, but same idea. You can see the bees at the front entrance here, and then the cluster sitting inside the, inside the hive, where the the cluster generating the heat penetrating the wood. And again, the handles, since the handles are thinner, you don't really see the handles sticking out. And this one is kind of interesting. You can see that this has a nice group of bees in it. These are nukes. It's hard to tell from the picture, but these are actually nukes. So this nuke has got a good size in it. This one is not as big, but it does have some, looks like it does have some bees inside. This looks dead. And this one looks dead. And this one looks like it's in good shape. In fact, it looks like the bees are almost clustering on that side of that side of the wood. Look how white it is there. So the thermal camera is kind of an interesting tool. Works really, really good when there's high differences between the hive temperature and the outside temperature. So this is great for, winter time, really cold, and I like to do it at night, where you go out there and the bees aren't even flying at you, and you can go in there and very quickly scan through and see what's alive and what's not alive.
May I ask what kind of a device is that?
I was going to bring it, and I forgot to bring the stupid thing. It's a Fleur 1 is the one I use. So it's really a cheap thing. It's not expensive. What it does is it's a little device. It plugs on the bottom of either an Android or an iPhone, and it has its own camera. And the app inside of it is kind of cool because this one actually takes a actual picture as well as the infrared picture or the heat picture. And you can actually flip your finger across the screen and it goes from this picture to the actual photo. So you can actually see the hive itself. It's a pretty cool little app. And they're not that expensive. They're maybe a couple $100. I don't remember. Ron, you have one as well. Do you remember what you paid for yours?
I believe mine is a standalone camera, and I want to say under $400.
Yeah, I got the cheaper version. I got the one that actually connects onto a tablet or a phone.
Yeah,
and it was much less than that. I think I don't think it was even 200. Fleur 1 is the one I have.
yeah. But what's nice about it is, at least the one I have, it actually gives you the temperature. So like that picture there to the left, it'll actually tell you the temperature. Also takes the picture you're talking, the natural and that, all kinds of filters. You can download it, you can forward it, so it's very.
This is something I was thinking maybe in the wintertime we could come out to one of my apiaries and with the camera, and we could come out and have a group of people. We can play with the Fleur during the night.
It's interesting that in the clinic that we listen to online about insulation, that the statistics would say that the top is half of the energy loss, but in these heat pictures, we're seeing a little bit of energy coming off the top, but a great deal coming off the walls of the hive, considering the square footage, the square inches actually, of the surface area. It kind of doesn't jive with the information that we got in that presentation about.
The only thing I could say to that would be that every hive has a different configuration. I use shims inside as well. All my lids have a shim in them, and so there's going to be some wax buildup on the top, and I use pretty thick plywood. So it could be that the material that I'm using is more insulative than what he was talking about. But I know I would agree. If you look at this nuke, it's got all around, it's got lots of heat being radiated off versus the top. And the same thing here. Lots of heat being radiated just in the front and versus the top. And there's 4 more sides on the sides here, or 3 more sides.
And there's more square.
Much more square inches. Yeah.
Indeed. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
I have one question on the. We're speaking of heat loss. I know you dip all your hive boxes, and is there any correlation between the box that has been dipped in a wax and a resin versus painted?
For heat radiation, and I'm giving you just an absolute guess. My guess is not. Heat absorption during the sun is definitely a difference because most boxes are painted white and will not absorb the heat. And ours are all wood color because we dip them in a paraffin and pine tar rosin mixture. And so they come out more natural looking. These hives here, though, that you're looking at, these nukes are actually painted white. I was trying to see if I can't really tell the other ones because I don't have that. The fact that this has that bar on the side probably means it's one of the dipped ones, although it has a handle on the side, so this is not dipped either. So yeah, I don't know. I can't tell from this, but this picture is kind of interesting because this is the lid being picked up. You notice how thick the lids are? We have pretty thick lids with that shim in there. And so this is the lid being picked up here, my arm. And then, the bright spots are actually the bees on the top of this hive. This is a pallet, as you can tell, there's side-by-side hives. And Fleur, I guess I put the mark everywhere. Yeah, so Fleur 1 is the name of that camera.
A somewhat unrelated question. You said you use shims in your lids. What
Yeah.
are they, like 3/8, half inch?
3/8 inch. We use a 3/8 and 3/8 inch shim. We actually, what we use is those stakes that you use for surveying stakes. And my brother's a excavating contractor, so he gets those by the bundles, and I use it for damn near everything.
And you don't end up with tons of.
I do. I get more. You definitely get more. More burrcomb on the top. I have some that are 3/4 inch shims built in, and those things just really gob up on the top. It takes a lot of cleaning, but most of the time I don't even mess with it.
And the advantage is feeding the pollen sub. Is that the only? Yeah. That's the only advantage.
That's the advantage. You can feed straight out of it. We also put little dowels in there so that that sits in the just on the inside of the box, so the lids don't slide off. Remember, these are migratory lids, not telescoping.
Oh, so the dowels go down into
they're
the
only
box.
maybe 1/8 of an inch down. They just go in there just to make sure that it doesn't rattle off when they're transporting.
Interesting.
So here's a get ready for the bloom. This is actually mustard, and this was a kid that worked for me. He was a high school kid, and this is probably, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago. And this mustard, this is our Fremont ground, and this has been the family since the 1800s. And that mustard was, this kid, he wasn't very tall. He was probably 5'5", but that's probably 10 feet of mustard there. So what I was also going to use this is, even you don't have to be in a orchard to have a monoculture, because pretty much these hives were surrounded by this mustard, and this is a 200-acre piece that had mustard like this everywhere. So they were pretty much monoculture too. There wasn't a lot of other things except for that mustard that they were feeding on, but they actually did well. And actually, the honey that came out of that was incredible. That mustard honey is really nice and smooth. So this is the same kid. You can see he's not a very big kid, but the mustard was like huge that year. Any questions?
No. I mean, I'm just pondering, what is the first step for anyone to participate or bring the hives to almonds or pollination?
So the first thing is to get a contract or find a broker or piggyback off someone who goes in, like Ron piggybacks off of me. We go in together into almonds. And
Ron, how many hives are you carrying right now?
Are you there, Ron?
Do you know?
I'm not sure what his count is now. He was running 20 to 30. I'm not sure what he's doing.
He was targeting for 50, what I heard last time.
There's there's an article in the American Bee Journal about sideliners, gathering together as a group to go into almonds.
So what we've done in the past, and what Ron does with me, is in January, we actually move his hives to my staging yard. And we move off of his because Ron runs off of bottom boards, and we move his hives onto our pallets. And then from that point, he just piggybacks along with us. So when we move our hives in, his hives go along with them. So that one of the things is you got to be able to move quickly, and we have all the equipment and we're set up to be able to throw. We have the trucks and the forklifts and what's needed to bring in. And I mean, Sung, if you're interested in doing that type of thing, let me know. We'll be able to work something out, and you could probably do the same thing. I have a yard that the staging yard is the one that so like Sister Barbara, we had that class. That's where we were. So the staging yard can hold, we could hold probably 500 hives in that one. We could probably do another probably 1,000 hives in, one that's closer to the Calaveras Road. So, there's plenty of space. That's way more than I have, and probably anyone in this club combined would have. So, if people are interested in that, let me know, and we can see if we can work
So
something out.
then, so exactly time frame would that be?
So January is when you have to start getting ready.
I know, well, January, then having it bring the hive to your staging area
So
is when
it's in January. It'd be sometime in January.
yeah, I see. Okay,
By that time, they should be their 8 frame strength or better.
Yeah.
got it.
So reframing this a little bit for the average backyard beekeeper who wants to get their colonies ready for the nectar flow in February, and if you have, say, a box that's down to like 5 frames of bees in November, then one basically should invest a little bit in either feeding sugar or pollen substitute or both.
So make sure that you have enough sugar or nectar, carbohydrates in the hive, and stimulate them with protein, with pollen stuff, and that's the formula to build bees.
And check the mites.
Always, the mites should be low before that even starts.
Okay, and once you started feeding, you can't really let up until you get them to a nectar source. Otherwise, they'll get really screwed up.
Yeah, so keep the pollen on, make sure they have carbohydrates all the way up to the point where you're going into the field. Or in your case, when you start getting a bloom, as soon as you start seeing real nectar going in.
And for what it's worth, it seemed to me one year when I was watching what the bees were doing pretty closely, about the last week of January was when the bees changed and they started apparently going after nectar locally rather than robbing.
And that changes yearly. Sometimes it's early in January, sometimes it doesn't happen, until after we're actually in almonds. But yeah, you're right. For the most part, that's kind of the time when things are starting to bloom. Although around here we got that eucalyptus, so they can start bringing stuff in even sooner.
But it would seem that the eucalyptus alone is not enough to get them build themselves up to 8 frames by the beginning of February.
Yeah, so supplementing is the secret to bringing, putting protein stimulates the bees for growth.
And the reason for us doing it in our neighborhoods would be if we want to try and make a lot of honey this spring.
Correct. Let me just rephrase that. If you want to catch an early honey flow, or if you're someone like Hal who wants to be getting the queen operation going sooner.
One more question about teaming up. Is hive configuration an essential, like being double deeps, or would the deep and the medium be able to integrate with your system?
Yeah, no, that would be fine. But the problem with us is it's actually the transport. So a deep and a medium, we got to set up on the truck where they're together, or else you get some where the strap is not hitting. So
everything needs to be the same on a truck.
Yeah.
Got it. Thank you.
Jim, I had a question for you about as you're cycling the population to put out into the field. This past year, we had a really warm February. Is there a risk of that the hives will suddenly start casting off swarms and losing population?
Yeah, I mean, if they're if they're getting large, and it's just like in the rest of the swarm management, you gotta stay on it, and yeah, you could spin off swarms sooner, which means you may need to start doing splits sooner. But the other danger is that if you're not feeding them, you could build them up where they're large, and all of a sudden you get a cold spell and they run through the resources really quick. And so you got to watch that as well. So you got to make sure that anyone who's heard any of my classes, there's two things I always focus on. It's nutrition and it's varroa. So you always got to make sure that they have good nutrition, even later in the spring. Got to make sure that, if you have a rainy season, a rainy spell where we haven't had in a while, we've got 2 weeks where they can't fly, that, a large hive is eating up resource faster than a small hive. And so you got to make sure that they don't starve out. I actually was going to put some starve out pictures on here too, but I figured that was a little gruesome.
And Jim, also with one thing to mention with the pollen patties, if they don't want it, they won't eat it. So you're not really losing out.
Did I answer your question? I'm not sure if I may have jumped around too much. Okay, good.
Jim, anytime if your hive locked, closed, and you don't bother them. I did read, and I heard other people not touching the hives at all, making sure that everything is all right in the hive. And somewhere in the beginning of November or middle of November until middle of December, they will just keep the hive closed and not bother them, not inspect them, not do anything with them.
So I do inspect, but my inspection, again, like I showed in those pictures, changes. I won't normally break the hive apart like you would warmer weather. So I will, I'm not opposed. In fact, I need to make sure that the hives are doing well. So making sure that the bees are growing and that there's no problems that have to be solved. I don't see a reason to break a hive in pieces in the winter because you really can't do anything anyways. If you lose a queen, if you don't have a queen in there, there's nothing to do about it. You can't buy a queen that time of year. You can't normally, nowadays it's changing, but traditionally you can't make a queen that time of year. So there's really not a lot of benefit to doing a full inspection where you rip them apart, unless you see there's a potential problem. That problem might be you have a laying worker or something like that, or suspect that you need to clear that hive out of there.
So an inspection is looking at the entrance to see what the activity is like on a good day, and then popping the cover off to look at how many bees or how many gaps are filled with bees and how many are scrambling around the top.
Yeah, so I still try to find out how much brood we have, and you can do that pretty well from the bottom. If I look at the number of bees, that's my current workforce, and then the amount of frames of brood is my future. So I want to make sure that the number of frames is increasing, the way it should be to catch a good 8 to 10 frame sized hive by February. So I still want to see brood, and I can see that from looking underneath though. I can tip them.
So a hive with 8 frames of bees would be like 4 or 5 frames of brood?
Yeah. Yep. Which means you have to have a pretty good support structure to support, keep that warm in cold weather. Any other questions?
You don't wrap hives in insulation in winter, right?
I don't. It's just a labor issue.
You bother to put insulation on the top?
I'm going to this year. It's after that meeting we had the other day. The guy in I know the guy in Canada does it. I can't remember his name. And I'll go ahead and pick some up. It's cheap. It helps. I'm sorry.
Yeah, stapler.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, Stepler, right?
Pardon?
Stepler, right?
Yes, yes.
So it works for him in Canada where it's pretty darn cold. So it'd be interesting. It wouldn't affect anything we're doing. So I might try it. I've done things with nukes before. I've actually put Christmas lights in with them to generate heat to keep a really small nuke alive in the real cold weather. And I've had limited success with that. But that insulation sounds pretty interesting.
What kind of insulation? Have you thought about that material that they use for like water heaters that you can get by the yard?
Yeah, I was thinking the bubble wrap stuff. I don't want something too thick because I don't want it blowing off. We had a big windstorm last year and lost a bunch of hives from lids popping off. And I have apiaries that are remote that I can't get to easily. So a lot of the hives died during that period.
Hey, Jim, we keep hearing that we don't have winter bees, but with the number of hives that you inspect and looking at the amount of brood, you must have develop a feel for what the lifespan of our winter bees are. Does it look like it changes dramatically? I mean,
what's my understanding, and this is, I don't know the stats to actually back this up, but I believe that the number one cause of death for bees is, natural death is they wear their wings out. So if you look at wintertime, when days are short, they're flying a lot less. Cold weather, they're going to fly less. So they're going to naturally last longer regardless, right?
Yeah. But I mean, you hear about winter bees lasting 6 months or something like
that. Yeah, that's different though. And that's a metabolism change is my understanding. Again, we're getting outside of this is, I'm repeating stuff I've heard, not that I've experienced.
Right. Yeah.
So, but and I'm not on the East Coast, so I don't get to experience that directly.
Now, I would think that from, yourself looking at as many hives as you do and looking at the amount of brood that you have and seeing what the populations are looking like, after a few weeks, and you'd have a feel for what you think the lifespan of our winter bees are.
Well, I can tell you that, it doesn't take as much brood to keep the population, which means they're not dying as fast, right?
Okay.
But I don't have anything to quantitative analysis.
Yeah, right.
Greg, you might want to look. You might want to listen to a couple of Randy's broadcasts, because the big thing he talks about is the winter turnover, and really it's the nurse bees kind of handing off the protein to the next generation, and when they're done with that, then they just kind of are exhausted and die, and you'll see piles of bees outside the hive. And that'll happen sometime in February, I think, is when that occurs, when the bees it's like a cold snap. And the bees just kind of give it up, but it's usually after they transfer the protein. Randy's pretty articulate about
it. Yeah, he'd be a good one to look at. From my standpoint, my observation, I could assume that it would something that I have done because in January and February I'm manipulating bees a lot. So if I see a pile of bees outside, my guess is I did something that I shouldn't have. But I actually might read that myself because it would feel better if there's a better cause of that or something I don't have to feel so bad about. But yeah, so, I don't know. I don't have an answer to that. I don't track the bees to that level. So I don't personally have any observations that I could be confident on. Any other questions? All right. Well, thanks for letting me share here. This was kind of fun. I got a chance to look through a whole bunch of pictures that I haven't looked at for a while. So it was kind of fun for me to put that show together. And sorry, Ron, I put you upside or sideways. I'm going to put you right side up.
Thank you very much, Jim, for putting all that time into throwing together an hour-long presentation. I know it's a lot of work, and it's really appreciated. I'm sure it will be appreciated by scores of beekeepers in the future who will see it on the website.